I actually predicted this 2 years ago, a year and a half to be exact. I even wrote a paper to some administrations, but it is what it is, and it does happen. And I just would ask everyone to pray for peace, or at least sanity. But Putin's not crazy. It's strategic. It's a game of, everyone keeps saying that, and that's just my perspective from the private room. It's a game of Go, not chess. And they're playing Go, and it's a more strategic game. That's all I'm saying. And that's all I will say at this point. But that's just my observation for this particular room, because everyone in this room, we know caliber. We're more, we're tech news. We're higher intellect, in my opinion. Like, we think of things macro, not micro. And then we look at micro. So you did that all the time, Tyler. You've always done it, right? Like, don't just look at, you get an app and, okay, yeah, I know we do both, but you get an app and most people are like, oh, it just serves my needs.
Right.
Well, right, okay.
I had a call with Matt yesterday. I hope he doesn't mind me revealing that. And Matt is on the Twitter stage today. Sometimes he's in Twitter, sometimes he's in Clubhouse. And he's chief. His bio in Twitter, I'm reading, says Microsoft Chief Digital Officer, High Tech Leader, Tech Passion, Disruption, Future Casting. I love that word, future casting. I've not heard of that. And JT is joining us. And anyway, so Matt and I had a call because he does this cool thing internally with Microsoft folks, and we were talking about what is tech news, because we're going to have to mention it on the Microsoft call. The reason he invited me to join one of their internal calls is because he listens to tech news and he enjoys tech news, because he, like probably the rest of us, have grown skeptical of the utility and usefulness of mainstream media in the search for truth. And he's a truth seeker. I would like to think I am too. I would like to think all of it, that one of the common things that unites all of us is we are on a search for truth, and we respect each other enough to, in this pursuit of what the hell's really going on. And I think that's why we had a big bump in visitors yesterday, because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what the hell's really going on. And a lot of people are starting to think social audio rooms like this are a good opportunity to try and figure out what's really going on. And we have our own angle. And today is a good day for us to do this, because I just shared in by the way, at some point, if you're a hardcore tech newser and you join every day, like Cheryl does, like Ken does, like Dr. Fran does, Ben certainly has for a long time, Messi and other, Vinay, some the real hardcore tech newsers eventually will get invited to a back channel that we share. And so many of you are in it, and you know that, and that's great. And honestly, I'm not the one who manages that, to be blunt. And in that back channel, I just sent a link to, which I don't normally do, but I sent a link that Biden has, according to NBC News, which is mainstream news, but in this case it seems legitimate. It says Biden has been presented with options for massive cyber attacks against Russia. The options presented include disrupting the internet across Russia, shutting off power, and stopping trains in their tracks, very literally. And of course, I'm going to pin this to the top of the tech news room here in Clubhouse. Hopefully, Cheryl, if you could share it to the top of the Twitter space, that would be very cool too. And that's kind of one of the cool things of this format. But back to the point, we're interested in what the truth is, just like everybody is. And I realized in my call with Matt yesterday, there were some very, very big rooms in Twitter spaces all about Ukraine. There's big rooms today in Clubhouse exclusively about Ukraine. We're seeing a bump in people yesterday on the topic of Ukraine, and rightfully, I think we should, and I think they should too. And I think this is the format of social audio becomes expose the relevancy of social audio gets a boost because people really want to know what's going on, and we want to get in a group of people, of intelligent people who have a passion for just honestly figuring out what the hell's going on, and talking it over with each other and sharing our own perspectives from around the world. And that's what we did yesterday. That's what we're doing today, to a certain degree. And there's new developments today like this one. So I want to kick things off with this story that I just pinned at the top of the clubhouse room that says, one quick point. Go ahead, Matt. Hold on, Matt. Before you do, no one can hear you because I need to plug in the audio. So hold on for 2 seconds.
No problem. And before Matt speaks, I just want to give you kudos, Tyler, because I did, you started this foundation, and I mentioned it to Stephen Ibriaki in the podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
He's the founder for the AI for Good Global Summit for the United Nations. Yep. And he's also the vice chair of AI for Good on healthcare. So this will bubble up to the UN and the Security Council, which Russia is a member of. They've already had meetings. And so it's how do we use tech, and this is scary. Because Putin said it, so did she. Putin specifically said, whoever controls AI controls the world. She just says he wants to be the best in AI by 2030, ETA 2050. Yeah. So when we look at tech and tech news around the world and the geopolitical, which a lot of people are missing because they're still going back to gas and oil, it's much greater than what they know. And I'm done. I'll land my plane.
So check this out. So this, because they're now both starting to talk about the cyber war element, right? Because we're now in 2022, and that means we're now going to start experiencing what cyber war might really be all about. Nobody really knows because nobody's ever really been in one. And I'll hand it over to you in a second, Matt. But this article says from NBC News at the top of the clubhouse room that I pinned it, Biden has been presented with options for massive cyber attacks against Russia. The option presented include disrupting the internet across Russia, shutting off power. I told you, did I not tell you? Take control of your own power, and stopping trains in their tracks. And that's massive supply chain issues. That's your food, by the way. So again, I told you to take control of your water, your food, of your energy, precisely because of these reasons, because they've been digitized and can be victimized in cyber attacks. And Russia's already saying, as even before this, that they're going to retaliate to the sanctions by unveiling atrocities, the likes of which the world has never seen before. Which we've seen nuclear bombs before, so we assume he means something else, which would have to fall under the scope of cyber attacks, we have to assume. Now, this article says that President Joe Biden has been presented with a menu of options that for the U.S. to carry out massive cyber attacks designed to disrupt Russia's ability to sustain the military operation in Ukraine. For people familiar with the deliberations, tell NBC News. That's pretty straightforward reporting, right? It's just 4 sources. Kudos. Redundant, not just one source. They're unnamed sources. We don't necessarily like that, so you have to take that with a pinch of salt in this day and age. But 4, that's pretty redundant. That's good redundancy. 2 U.S. intelligence officials, so not named, but titled. 1 Western intelligence official and another person. So they're not naming the sources, but they're giving the titles of the sources. Again, that means we can take this information with even less salt, practically no salt at this point. We can take it at face value as being reported. And another person briefed on the matter say no final decisions have been made, but they say the U.S. intelligence and military cyber warriors are proposing the use of American cyber weapons on a scale never before contemplated. Among the options, here we go. Disrupting internet across Russia, shutting off electric power. Told you. I didn't tell you. I told you. And tampering with railroad switches to hamper Russia's ability to resupply its forces. 3 of the sources said, quote, you could do everything from slow the trains down to have them fall off the tracks, one person briefed on the matter said. The sources said the options presented include preemptive responses to Russia's invasion in Ukraine, irrespective of whether Russia launches its own cyber attacks on the U.S. in retaliation for sanctions, which it basically had said it would do. They said most of the potential cyber attacks under consideration are designed to disrupt but not destroy, and therefore fall short of an act of war by the United States against Russia. Interesting technicality there, because the distinction is we're not trying to destroy anything, we're trying to disrupt. So technically, that isn't an act of war. They say the idea is to harm networks and not people. Again, a key distinction. Officials are debating the legal authorities under which the attacks could take place, whether they would be covert action or clandestine military activity. Either way, the U.S. would not publicly acknowledge carrying out the operations, the sources say. So we're not going to outwardly say, yeah, we did that, right? That's also one of the huge benefits of cyber warfare, is it can be done with plausible deniability. The U.S. Cyber Command, the National Security Agency, and the CIA and other agencies would have a role to play in the operations, the sources said. Quote, our response will be harsh and measured, but not so severe as to encourage Putin to take more drastic steps. The White House did not initially respond to a request for comment after publication. A spokesperson for the NSC said in a comment that this report is widely off base and does not reflect what is actually being discussed in any shape or form. Oh, wow. Okay, so by the way, that is reporting. That is journalism. They have their sources, and then they checked with the authority, the boss, who this is about, which is the NSC and National Security Council. And somebody at the National Security Council, the spokesperson for the National Security Council, Emily Horn, says, that's bullshit. Your sources are lying to you. Now you've got that is so much missing from what's the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, what have yous, are desperately missing in this day and age, which is checking with the source, not the source, but the subject, or rather the object of the story, to get their take and let them give their 2 cents. And they're saying, no, your sources are bullshit. That's what real journalism used to be about. So I want to give kudos to NBC News in this article for doing good journalism. The person briefed on the matter said that there was a significant divide within the U.S. government, with one camp fearful of escalating and another urging a strong cyber response, blah, blah, blah. Cyber weapons are going to be used in a way we haven't used other weapons, says James Lewis, a cyber expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It gives us options we wouldn't have had before. Now, on that point, I did myself a little thinking about this. You might say this might be a kind of a hobby area of mine. And I wanted to know, as this person correctly says in this article, I didn't read this, but I should have. It says that the reason is here it is. The person briefed on the matter said that there is a significant divide, with one camp fearful of escalating, because that's the nature of this beast, is this escalating tit for tat that we don't want to get caught up in. And if that were to happen, which of course it would, what is the end result of an escalation of a cyber war? We don't know, because we've never done one. I think I've figured it out. I think I know what the actual end result of a cyber war is. What is the actual nuclear option, if we can call it that, in a cyber war? Because in regular war, you have missiles and people and planes and tanks and trains and whatever, and then you have the nuclear option, and it's kind of left as an option of last resort. In cyber warfare, you've got, shutting off oil pipelines. We've already been the victim of that, by the way. We've got shutting off meat production. We've also been the victim of that, by the way. We've also got meddling in social media. We've got that on a daily basis. But what is the nuclear option when it comes to cyber warfare? I think that's an interesting question, and I think I figured out the answer after doing some head scratching on my own. And I think the nuclear option rests solely in the hands of the United States. I think we are a cyber warfare nuclear power, and the rest of the world is not. Here's why. Because we have the unique ability, the United States government has the unique ability to force Google and Apple to shut off their operating systems, and Microsoft on the laptop computers. So America uniquely can shut off all smartphones from operating, period. To go black, to be bricked, to be useless paperweights in a heartbeat. And all laptops, similarly, could be shut off via the software that they run. So, And in many cases, they have some hardware connection possibilities as well through Apple and Google and many of the hardware manufacturers. But notably, the operating systems could be told to be shut down nearly instantaneously. So I believe that that is possible. And if that
And
is,
Tyler,
The
oh,
hold on,
genius, Tyler.
more importantly, if that is done, what I'm calling the nuclear option, that could, what would happen in that case? What happens, assuming that does go into play, and the U.S. tells Google and Apple to shut off all devices, and Microsoft shut off all the operating systems instantly, and or they do it through some kind of controlled backdoor virus that they've always, some kill switch that they've known for a rainy day that they've had or whatever. And what happens then if a country's mobile devices stop working all within the same minute? What would that cause? I believe that would cause a bit of widespread social unrest and panic in a way that we've never witnessed before, because that situation never
It would
happened.
be a Tyler. It would be a. This is
oh,
Robert. It would be a tech Armageddon.
okay. I just want to add one thing. Thank you, Robert. Tyler, I just want to clarify two things, and I'm gonna shut up and listen because it's late for me and I've been up too long. The real nuclear option scares me. So, Tyler, I'm speaking to you personally, and you know this, but to everyone else in the room, I would just suggest we pray. No one has seen nuclear bombs in the former Marine Corps actually take place. What we've seen is atom bombs and hydrogen bombs. Nuclear is one level up. That's all I'll say. And it has never been practiced on the civilian population, in a warfare scenario. I just want to clarify this, not nuclear. And there's things called tactical nuclear, but we have not experienced nuclear yet. We do, there are tests, but not purposely on landmass. Okay, I'll just move
Yeah,
on for the
yeah, you
next
have.
point.
Yeah, you have, can
I'm
ask again.
sorry. Let me just, I'm going to land my plane in 2 seconds. The other thing is that I agree with you, Tyler. If they did that option, that is, these are escalation steps. And I'm just thinking if they really were going to go that way, that's fine. We could do that. And your point is very valid in that sense that it could shut down things and reset things. But I hope that this doesn't, because I am familiar a little bit, and I'll just say that much, macroly, on where AI, we're much closer to AGI systems than people know from DoD defense. And all governments have been on this path since around 2019. What we know is commercial usage, but on AGI, and that scares the hell out of me, yet I'm building a system. I know what it does, but it is what it is, right? You build a gun, it's a computer. So, it's something that everyone has to deal with. And so that's all I want to say, Tyler, and thank you. Because you educate people with tech, and the more there's awareness, the more it stops this bullshit, in my opinion. And apologize, ladies, for the language and everyone else, but okay, I'm
I want
done.
to tie it back to the comment that the discussions internally, according to this NBC News article, is that they want to disrupt and not destroy. What I'm proposing definitely disrupts, and technically, there's no actual destruction that happens in that scenario. If you know, so anyway, it's just
But Taylor, suddenly the sanctions on, like, for example, Huawei is an advantage to them, because they don't use both systems.
exactly right.
Exactly.
Many
B-
Exactly.
OS.
BB points out a really interesting, important technicality, which is that Google was banned by the United States government from providing Android to Huawei, not just Android, the operating system, but also the Google Play Store, which is part of Android, actually. So Huawei had to build its own operating system, which is based on Android. So technically, Huawei's operating system isn't Android. They're very unique in that way. That's pretty much the only smartphone that doesn't run on Android or
iOS.
Apple's operating system called iOS. So that is a unique distinction that people with Huawei phones might be immune from all of this. So
Hey Tyler, could I just
Yeah,
mention that? Let's not forget. I mean, there's other like cyber things other countries can do to us that are very important. Some of which we've
sure.
already seen.
Yes.
They've already. I mean, we had a software malware which supposedly is unattributable, whether it was Iran or Russia, whomever it was, that closed down the Colonial pipeline. Which is one of our major oil pipelines. So I mean, there's other things that can happen, right? You can close down an oil pipeline. You could disrupt the transmission of electricity with software because they all run on software. So there's a lot of things that a lot of countries seem to be capable of. For those who don't know, and this is obviously not taking down a whole country, the Iranian government shut down the entire computer system of Las Vegas Sands a couple of years ago because the then CEO and principal owner, who's now deceased, Sheldon Adelson, had basically openly pontificated about just like bombing them, and this is where it is. And so they decided to teach him a lesson, and they took down his computers. So
Mm.
all of a sudden, they couldn't book reservations. And they had, it was their whole website, was down for like at least 2 weeks. Okay,
Wow.
so I mean, there's a lot of different things that a lot of countries have the capability of doing that don't control an Apple or a Google. So and I just wanted to mention that.
Oh yeah, of course.
And Ken, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm getting excited. Ken, thank you, my brother. Haven't seen you in a while. He reminded me of my other point, Tyler.
Yeah.
If you hack cybersecurity, in truth, I almost didn't want to say this, but Ken touched upon it. We could turn our own weapons against ourselves because everything has been digitized. Even in Russia, most nuclear armed countries have that. It's digitized. You just turn your own systems against them, like we're talking about Google. But that's what I want to pray for. So
So
that's
check
just my
this out.
piece on that.
So our friend Cal Patel, I believe, is listening as he's known to do to the live stream because he just sent me a DM in our secret little back channel that I referenced earlier, sending me a BBC article, and not just me, but everyone in the channel, a BBC article that is totally relevant to this topic of conversation we're having at the moment. It says, um, tech giants are being told, obviously by the US government is the implication here, but they're being told to filter out all unverified accounts on their networks. Social networks should let people hide posts and messages from accounts without a verified owner the government has proposed. If passed, the government's online safety bill would force large social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, obviously all of them. Oh, this is UK government. Cal definitely is listening because he's texting me to correct me. It's UK government. Um, if passed, the government's online safety bill would force large social networks such as Facebook and others to let people filter out unverified accounts. How to verify a user's identity would be up to the social network. Culture Secretary said the plan would reduce anonymous trolling. The government's proposed online safety laws could see social networks fined 10% of their global turnover if they fail to tackle harmful content. The bill also blah, blah, blah. So this is based also on a prediction that I've been spouting about for many months, that the social networks in 2022 are going to roll out identity verification, and this certainly falls into that.
Tyler,
Tyler, does that mean that Clubhouse is going to get rid of the 16 phony accounts of bots from Charlize Theron? That follow me or something. I mean, because they're all phony accounts, and even though I report them, that they don't get rid of them.
Yeah.
Tyler,
That was me.
I've invited Elena Ferrer. I think there's Ukraine on her profile, and I
Mhm.
see her also in Justin Higgins' room. So you can,
Oh, great.
if
Hey,
you need
Elena.
her comment here.
Yeah.
Hi, I've been trying to figure out how to send you a message. I wanted to see if you want an update on Ukraine and what's
Do it.
happening.
Let's hear
I
it.
am originally from Ukraine. I have my parents in Kiev and a lot of other family member and friends, and I've been with them on the phone since the early hours of today.
Wish
So
them well.
yes, so Kiev has been there have been multiple bombs of falling in Kiev. I mean it's the troops are close to the city. Most of the residents spend the night either in they're called shelters, but they're technically basements. They're not really well equipped. They're not like nice shelters you see in the movies. They're basements. It is February. It is cold. A lot of people left the city. The most folks going west towards Lviv and Uzhgorod and Chernivtsi, and traffic jams. What used to take 6-7 hours takes over 24 hours to get. There is the borders are also. My understanding is that the borders are closed to men because there's been
Right.
yes,
Conscription.
there's correct. So it is not possible anymore for men to leave the country. So it's an incredible humanitarian crisis. Again, it is cold weather. Did you discuss Chernobyl at all?
No, please do.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll share what I know. A lot of it is kind of what my family and friends are telling me. So if some of it turns out to be incorrect, do not hold it against me because information is fluid and it is changeable. So as you know, Chernobyl, the site of the largest nuclear disaster since 1986, there is a sarcophagus which was placed over the nuclear reactor. Um, it was working fairly well. I mean, there's been contamination and such, but it has been kind of sort of managed and maintained. So what happened yesterday, I believed, is that the Russian army effectively took control over the nuclear reactor and the exclusion zone, it is called. It was there's very few people who still live there. Almost nobody lives there. It's a contaminated area. It's been abandoned for a while. What's the significance of it? There are a couple of ways we can interpret it, right? It's really, I think it's a bargaining chip, and it's something to be used in negotiations potentially. And there are two completely opposite hypotheses. One is it could have been used, for example, if you crack the sarcophagus, basically you release contamination, right? And what we know from 1986 when that happened is that the contamination cloud, some of it went onto Kiev, some of it went north to Belarusia, to the Gomel area. And
It even came to England.
I was just going to say, a lot of it went to Europe, right? So yes, exactly. So the scope, the scale of this potentially is crazy. So that is, at least today, it is safe, I guess, from any sabotage, and it is under the control of the Russian army. So whatever that can be used as a bargaining chip, because that is a way potentially, which I hope will not happen, is also to pull NATO into the conflict, right? So
Well,
that
another thing,
also.
this is
Energy
Robert. Another thing to
passes.
consider is, again, what we see may not be all that is. There might be other things there that might be necessary for some other initiatives that resided there long after the explosion. And I'll just leave it at that. That's more than
I was going
bargaining
to
chip.
say,
Right. But I
so
agree with
just
you. I mean, what we see is a small window, right? So that has happened. There is a concern. What I know for a fact, because from a relative, is that this morning in one of the residential areas there was an attempt in Kiev. That's the city. It's not the center, but that's a residential place. There were military equipment, there were tanks, and I think some type of military vehicles. They that did enter a residential site to stop them. They did go through, but they stopped further down.
Yeah, I was
So
just referencing Chernobyl. Sorry, I just did. Thank you.
yeah, no, thank you very much. So I mean, that's a horrible situation, incredible dislocation of the population, a lot of suffering. Again, this is February in Ukraine. It is very, very cold. It is a horrible place to be, taking up and leaving the place with families and children and strollers, and the Western Ukraine is overwhelmed with internal refugees. I mean, they're trying to accommodate, and it's a big issue. I mean, I have a lot to say, like, on the geopolitics of it. I don't want to take up the space on the floor, but that's kind of the most recent update. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to chime.
And Elena, this is LS. So, Tyler, you got it. But I'm praying for you and your family because what you're talking about is not theoretical. not abstract, but people on the ground. And what you just said, I'm happy you said it, not me. Tyler talked about this, right? He said nuclear war. If you're going to talk about a tactical nuke, maybe you don't set off a bomb. You just set off the reaction of that. So, I'm just going to pray. I'm in full disclosure, and people know that, but that's good. I'm a scientist, and I grew up, Tyler, everyone knows I'm just going to pray so that we don't have to end half of humanity to figure this shit out again. And that's all I'm saying. So
Yeah, I don't think
there's
it'll
been a
get to that
lot.
level, buddy.
Well, I deal with worst case scenarios, so sorry, but I was in the
It's
Marine
as
Corps, and
serious
so
as
you're right. But what we do is we come together as a community, we pray, and we be informed. And I'm sorry, I just wanted to talk to Elena. Excuse me. I'm praying for you. I have people there, close to there. I heard a similar thing, and they're very close to where you are. And I was wondering why it was so chaotic. And in 3 days, that's all I'm saying. So sometimes this comes out later, 6 months later for everyone else in the world. But people on the ground are trying to tell you what's going on. And I'm not saying I believe one way or the other. You trust and verify. But the rest of the world would say that can't be true because it's so bad. We wouldn't think we would do this in 2022 as humanity. And I'll let my play. I'm done.
Thank you. And to be honest with you, I am in disbelief that we have conventional military today operation in Ukraine. If you asked me 10 days ago, I was one of those people who believed until the final moment would prevail. I did not believe at all there would be any military incursion, and especially for me to be telling you today that there is a real risk that the Russian army is going to enter Kiev. I don't even know how to begin to comprehend this. Like, it's I don't have any words. I'm at a loss for words. Now, the good news, one last thing, there is a potential, and if you are if any of you pray, there is a potential for some type of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine this morning. It is slim and it's uncertain. They are now bargaining about the exact conditions and who will be present and where and at what level, and will foreign observers be present or not. But that is, I think, if we can all pray towards that, because if the army enters Kiev, they will, I think, at this point, take Kiev. At what cost? How many people will die on both sides? How many civilians will die? How much destruction will happen? It's all it's unknown. So if we could get everybody to the table, and at some point when we have more time, I'm very happy to I'm a political scientist, and I teach at the university political economy and global environment of business. So I'm happy to go in depth into my understanding of how we got to this sorry state. But that's, if we can all send our prayers towards hopefully some type of dialogue before we get complete urban warfare in Kiev and other large cities which I absolutely do not want to forget, and small cities. One life lost is too many. I think that would be the best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all of that.
You.
Yeah, thanks again. And I wanted to go back to Matt because I remember I went on a monologue right as I was about to hand it over to Matt. So Matt, over to you in the Twitter space stage.
Yeah, no problem, Tyler. I think my commentary would have fit in, drafting off of your opening statements, but in the context of where we just dropped off, first of all, thoughts and prayers for everybody that's impacted either geographically or otherwise. So I do appreciate and empathize with the previous comments, and yeah, I think just bringing it back to this audience is, and we probably could all share our stories, and if we did, that wouldn't be what this podcast is about. But I think, my engagement with Tyler is I start every morning, participating in this, and I had a view of high tech, which was, I wouldn't say parochial, but it was broad based. But being part of this community really helps me understand what's real. So yeah, I'm in at 7 o'clock in the morning, but I'm on here for 90 minutes, and I take all of your wisdom and your point of views, all pretty close to the pin, and I bring those to my day life, at Microsoft, so I can speak to partners and customers and have a meaningful and educated point of view on any topic that comes my way. Could be from a C-level individual, could come from sales partner engineering. So, more importantly, just thank you, Tyler, and thank you to the audience. It helps, I think, hopefully I add more value, but it provides us the basis, the confidence, and the courage to speak about topics that don't come across the newspaper, don't come across mainstream media. We go 3, 5, 7 clicks down. And I think that really benefits all of us. So just wanted to share my interaction with Tyler and just wanted to thank everybody here in the Twitter space. And sometimes I'm on Clubhouse. There's no rhyme or reason. Whichever one is activated first, I show up in both, and I'm happy to connect with all of you. So thank you, Tyler.
Okay. So should we now get into the tech news? The first story from Reuters. They say they have sources, and we got to make this official with the official sound.
Air horn.
Yeah, the official air horn to kick things off. Reuters says they have sources that Ukraine is asking for volunteers from its hacker community, which is very substantial, by the way. I can assure you. So many of the best hackers in the world are Ukrainians, by the way. And we could get Jonathan Data in here to confirm that. I know our other cybersecurity friends who might be listening can also confirm that. The Tom Ryan on stage could even likely confirm that as kind of a well-known thing. And Ukraine, I think very intelligently, is asking for its civilian hacker community to protect critical infrastructure and conduct cyber spying missions against Russian troops and etc. Put their skills to work for the state, essentially. The government of Ukraine is asking for volunteers, citizens from Ukraine's hacker underground to help protect critical infrastructure, etc. Yeah, why not? That makes plenty of sense to me. The next one is a sister, keeping on the theme of kind of Ukraine and Russia for a second, as it relates to tech. There's an article from Politico. It says Russia-backed falsehoods and digital tricks related to its invasion of Ukraine are putting tech giants on the defensive over the spread of online disinformation. The world's biggest social media companies are scrambling to combat a global barrage of Kremlin-backed falsehoods, as the Kremlin is no stranger to the whole concept of misinformation. In fact, they deserve the gold medal. If there is an Olympics of such a thing, they would win the gold medal every time. Kremlin-backed falsehoods of spreading across the world's largest tech platforms and putting those companies' content policies to the test. The world's biggest social media companies are scrambling to combat a global barrage of Kremlin-backed falsehoods and digital tricks around the invasion of Ukraine, putting the tech giants back in the political crosshairs over the spread of online disinformation. Russian-backed media reports falsely claimed that the Ukrainian government is conducting genocide of civilians, ran unchecked and unchallenged on Twitter and Facebook. Videos from the Russian government, including speeches from Vladimir Putin on YouTube, received dollars from Western advertisers. Unverified TikTok videos of alleged real-time battles were instead historical footage, including doctored conflict zone images and sound. These debunked posts have been racking up millions of likes, comments, and shares on Facebook and Twitter, according to CrowdTangle, a social media analytics tool owned by Facebook, and Politico's separate review of TikTok and Google's YouTube. Social media companies are already under pressure from politicians in both the US and Europe, who argue that falsehoods ranging from COVID treatments to voting fraud and misinformation more generally provide justification to curtail the industry's liability protections, break the large tech companies up, or otherwise rein them in by demanding more transparency about their operations. Now, the conflict in Ukraine is fast becoming a proving ground over pledges these firms have made to clamp down on disinformation, especially given their insistence they now have a playbook that works. But plenty of disinformation is still getting through. Russia's top 5 international state-backed media outlets have used Facebook and Twitter to share debunked reports claiming that the Ukrainian military had committed unprovoked attacks on Russian allied forces. They also suggested NATO countries would carry out so-called false flag chemical weapons attacks in Ukraine's breakaway republics to tarnish Russia's reputation. Over the last 7 days, these Russian outlets garnered up 4 million engagements, likes, and shares and comments on Facebook. During the same period, Fox News' main Facebook page received 3.8 million engagements. You get the idea. So Russia's doing the full force on the disinformation on social media. Not a big surprise. That's kind of their bag. Their game. So the next is from Bloomberg that Google is under pressure to remove or cut commercial ties with some prolific pro-Russian YouTube channels. In fact, as I recall, the number one YouTube earner in all of YouTube for, I believe it was 2020, was a very young lady whose father clearly is involved behind the scenes because she's only about 6 or 7 years old, as I recall, maybe 8, and who happens to be a Russian family, and it's wildly popular. And that money ends up in a Russian bank account, ostensibly. So Google is under pressure to remove or cut commercial ties with some prolific pro-Russian YouTube channels. This is not a small potato thing. This involves one of YouTube's absolutely biggest content creators. Pro-Kremlin broadcasters are popular on the platform of YouTube. And now with the sanctions on Russia ramping up following its invasion in Ukraine, Google's YouTube is under pressure to remove Russian content creators and whatnot. The next is from Reuters. Experts say Russia's invasion of Ukraine could exacerbate chip shortages. Ukraine supplies 90% of the U.S. semiconductor-grade neon critical for chip-making lasers. As was that Professor Ossoff who started off today with that story? Somebody.
Yeah, I was just telling you that. Yeah.
There it is from Reuters.
Yeah.
Also being reported by Nikkei Japan, CNBC, Wired, Bloomberg, the semiconductor industry's trade publication, and other Tom's Hardware. So this seems incredibly reputable reporting here that Ukraine supplies 90% of U.S. semiconductor-grade neon critical for chip-making lasers. That could be a problem. So the next is that...
and also early drug development. A lot of things are done in Ukraine, outsourced.
Yeah. Denial of service attacks disrupt several Ukrainian government sites. I think we know what that's about, and that's why Ukraine's asking for its own hacker community to get involved. The New York Times is reporting that experts say Russia could use cryptocurrency tools to lessen the impact of U.S. sanctions, including a forthcoming digital ruble and spoils from ransomware attacks. Makes sense. They wouldn't be the first to take that strategy. Iran essentially did the same thing when they came under heavy sanctions due to the nuclear research, and they switched over on a state level to promoting Bitcoin. And those are your Ukraine-Russian tech-related headlines that I have here. Anyone else have a conflict-related tech article to share with the class? They want to make sure we...
Tyler, the Russian space head, he actually literally warned UN that they might end up having the International Space Station crash over US.
Yes. Okay.
What was that?
I got this one. So what Armish is referring to is one ostensibly the head of Russia's space agency, Rosmos, or if I'm pronouncing it correctly,
Roscosmos, yeah,
said that
Roscosmos, yeah,
right, that because of the International Space Station is a cooperation between the U.S. and Russia, right, that if Russia is sanctioned too severely, that they would then be not in a position to maintain their obligations on ISS, which include keeping it in the sky, and that they could then, he implied that they could control that it falls on the U.S. when it is no longer in orbit. This turns out under even simple investigation to be kind of ridiculous, because that maneuver to keep the ISS in orbit, the U.S. could handle that part of the responsibility if they chose to.
Tyler, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry. My chairman was the former director of NASA, but he's from Poland, previously at Canada Space Agency and NASA. And I don't say this too much because we're doing private sector, but I will tell you this. He helped build the robotics for the ISS, okay? And I didn't even know this. That just scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
And I won't predict anything. I'm just telling you, we really need a collaborative effort, because it's not one way or there's no science to it. It's really the human capital engineering that knows how to do it that have always been there, and there's been a collaboration of all of our countries. So that's all I want to say.
Fine. There's two issues. Keeping the ISS in orbit, can the U.S. do that without Russia? It seems very obvious that they could. Secondarily, if the ISS were to come out of orbit and try and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, I have it on good authority that it would turn into, it would not reach land due to the heat and everything. It would kind of combust on entry.
Yeah, correct. It will hit the ocean, hopefully. I agree.
Well, no, it shouldn't even.
No, Tyler, I think both are correct.
Yeah, but the theoretical way, just to complete it, the theoretical way is to bring that ISS into a dead orbit and keep it there for quite some time, which Chinese have done actually. The Chinese have brought one of their satellite into a dead orbit over India. It's actually a sort of threat, and from there you can drop. Practically, it's possible.
So somebody could maneuver if they chose to. But yeah, hold on one second. I'll hand it to you next, Ben, because I'm sure Ben has some good insights on this. But what Armish is referring to is people can, and you're saying that China has played games in orbit over India already, so as a precedence for how this could be weaponized in a kind of way, if somebody really chose to do that. Ben, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say my understanding would be that it would disintegrate as it came back into orbit, so you wouldn't have a football field size set of solar panels all in one piece, but you would have large chunks still making it to the surface. So I think, yeah. And where it lands, of course, depends on how the deorbit maneuver is done. And of course, there's plenty of control over that if it's done properly. It could easily be designed to end up in the debris, could easily be designed to end up in the ocean, which I think is the current plan when it's decommissioned anyway.
SpaceX has had some connections with ISS, some dockings and whatnot. So even SpaceX could get involved and keep it above, kind of control the orbitization, if that's the right word, of the space station and the entry, if it needed to come out of orbit and help control its. Anyway, so I don't know that that's a legitimate concern. What is concerning is that the head of Russia's space agency is even talking in this kind of a way. But
yes, that's my point. I'm sorry.
It definitely does expose that he's certainly not a fan of the sanctions. And, I think what it does is, as much as Russia might not like to admit that the sanctions are going to be very harmful, that the reality is that they very likely will be. And there seems to be a rather significant international appetite to punish Russia economically for this. Pretty much everything I've seen in the past couple of days, that seems to be a repeating theme, is that everyone's eager and anxious to make sure Russia is penalized for this in this sort of a way.
Yeah, but Tyler, how would we do that? Because Russian ruble crashed like 4 times in last 20 years. They have a way of getting through these difficult times. And if you look at just throwing some numbers here, debt to GDP ratio of Russia, it's just 18%. US has 133%. China is 70%. And basically it has highest fourth highest account surplus. And that too, it used to be 40% in US dollar last year, but they strategically brought it down to 15% by now. And the short-term debt is also very less. So Putin has very smartly over last 3 years reduced that exposure. He saw these sanctions coming in, and he compromised growth. So the growth rate of Russia is like less than around 1%. It hangs around 1%, but it's quite sustainable and self-sufficient. And a lot of their forex exposure just went to China. So the only way we can basically hurt Russia is oil prices come crashing. But I think US has already banned Venezuela and Iran with sanctions. So I'm not sure how that's going to happen. So that's the only way people would be able to hurt them. Or UK should punish their these Russian oligarchs who has a lot of investment in the London properties. I think they could directly hurt. Otherwise, I think Russians now they know how to live with economic hardship, and Putin doesn't care about people, their hardship.
It's easy to see in retrospect that the shift in foreign currency holdings in Russia over the past 3 to 4 years was fair warning of what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hey, and Tyler, who was that speaking? Because I think it was on Twitter Spaces.
It was
The
John.
Indian guy. I'm sorry,
Oh,
not
that's
John. I saw. I'm sorry. What was that? I'm
Parmesh.
sorry. I missed.
Amish,
I'm going to follow him, and I'm on Clubhouse, so I missed. Please follow me. But you're exactly right, because I think that's what scares me. And sorry to be in the room because I haven't been here in a while. And I love you all, guys. I love everyone, because we're trying to. And Tyler, you started this. Use technology to make the world better, not worse. And so I'm just wondering if the ISS. I'll remove myself objectively from it, right? If he made a threat, there has to be something behind it to be taken critical. And this isn't for the general public about, the space station falling. And that scares the hell out of me. And I'll just continue to pray. But I'm just letting you know, there's a threat, and what if it's a back door? It's like people talk about Ukraine hackers. There's white hackers, black hackers. What about a back door? What about 90 back doors? I've said this in other rooms recently when in the nighttime on Clubhouse, I'm like, who is Satoshi Nakamoto? You don't even, who is the group? No one can ever answer that question. You don't know who he is. You don't even know what the group is. Yet you follow a protocol. It's okay. It's a movement. But all this money and, I'm talking about the rooms, Tyler, we don't do. But Bitcoin's going to go crazy. We're going to be billionaires. I'm like, you don't even know who he is or what they are. So, reflect, step back, and figure out how to help humanity and yourself.
Okay.
Alice, what's going to happen in next couple of years is a threat which we are also not looking at. Imagine Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, all three of them surrendered their nuclear stockpile in 1994 based on the assurance from US, Russia they would come to their defense. But now when they do not, all the small countries around the world, they're now pretty much convinced that the only deterrence is nukes. And I believe there's going to be a strong nuclear arms race in coming 20, 30 years. Everyone's going to jump on it. And we have rugged nations like Pakistan who are walking around with low yield, very marketable nuclear weapon. And that's the crazy future we are looking up to. Be it Iran, Israel, no one's going to now de-escalate when it comes to nuclear weapon. They have seen it. And as far as the hacking is concerned, Putin's army is strategically attacking the critical infrastructure and like in Chernobyl to do what? What they are going to do is that they are going to plant their bugs into these systems, and after let's say 15 years, so let's say a couple of years, they leave Ukraine. They would be having Ukraine on their fingertip. I mean, in one click, they would be able to shut down all their power plants, all their nuclear power plants. That's why they are taking over all this critical infrastructure. They are going to bug it deep down, and then they will leave the democracy. But we can be sure that Ukraine is going to be next Belarus, next puppet to Russia, and there's going to be
Okay,
a
this is
nuclear
Robert.
arms race.
I'm sorry. This is Robert. I'm the non-doomsday person here. I do believe that I'm not trying to tone down what other people are saying, but it's just my opinion. I think things are measured. Yes, there are dominoes, and I totally agree with the other gentleman who said something about the nuclear movement from other states. But I think that was long before this, but I think this is definitely accelerating states wanting to have it. But I don't think there's the end of the world, guys, here. I think we don't have a set of people that want to commit suicide and ruin everything, but there are tactical moves that are happening, and everybody is watching,
But this is
and
as
there is a
serious
order
as the
change.
Cuba Missile Crisis. I mean, you have a nuclear power uh, that could probably and whose president has threatened that anyone interferes, they will experience. I mean, that was I saw that, and it was shocking and scary at the same time.
Tyler, can I chime in for a moment? This is
Let me
David on the.
let me give two little updates and then I'll hand it to you, David. It says on Friday, well, the CNN article says China lifts restrictions on Russian wheat imports, and this isn't going down very well, as you might imagine. On Friday, that's today, Australian Prime Minister Morrison slammed China over this maneuver as saying, at a time when the world was seeking to put additional sanctions on Russia, China have eased restrictions on Russian wheat to China, and that is simply unacceptable. But it tells you a lot about what's kind of going on behind the scenes here. As I've said, this is I make a lot of predictions, and I'm still standing by mine, which is one of the big meta kind of frameworks behind all of this is related to Russia and China. We're both, as we know, we've discovered this many smoke signals in articles over the past year that Russia and China are both working to get the world off the US dollar, and the US really doesn't want that at all, and really sees that as a major threat and would love to prevent that from happening. And if you think, how exactly would you stop Russia and China from collaborating in their joint obsession in priority and removing the US dollar as the default currency? Well, making Russia economically insignificant by sanctioning it to death and putting trade blockades with every Western country, that would suit the bill perfectly. And Russia entering Ukraine is the perfect excuse to do exactly that without the US losing anything at all. So that's my little conspiracy theory that yes.
So Tyler, can I chime in on the China thing?
Yeah.
David, sorry to have interrupted. I know you were up next, but I just want to share one bit of news. I was on the phone with my colleagues in China today, and we were talking about couple of Chinese folks who are stuck in Ukraine. And interestingly enough, and I just tweeted the article to you, the Chinese government put out a message to all Chinese citizens in Ukraine. There is no need for you to evacuate. Just hang out the Chinese flag wherever, on your cars, on your apartments, wherever. The Russian forces will not bother you. Right? I mean, talk about it's the article, and it's going all the rounds within China. I sent it to you a couple of minutes ago.
I have it here, and I'm
in
at the top of the clubhouse room so everyone can see it as well, and I'll read it for everyone who's listening. It says, China told its citizens who are currently in Ukraine to stay at home or display the Chinese flag on their cars amid Russian attacks. China on Thursday, that's yesterday, told its citizens in Ukraine to stay at home or display the national flag. The announcement from the Chinese embassy came the same day Russia attacked Ukraine. Other nations have urged their citizens to leave Ukraine or to be prepared to evacuate. In the hours after Russia launched an attack on Ukraine, the Chinese embassy in Ukraine advised Chinese nationals there to stay at home or to display the Chinese flag on their cars if they have to go outside. Quote, social order is chaotic and out of control, especially when there are periods of serious unrest in the city. It is best to stay at home and away from windows and glass to avoid accidental injury. The embassy told citizens that if they have to travel by car, they should take note of where to refuel and should affix the Chinese flag at a prominent spot on your car. Thousands of cars were spotted leaving Kiev on Thursday morning. In its reminder, the embassy also encouraged Chinese nationals in the country to help each other, suggesting that wealthier Chinese businessmen or Chinese citizens more familiar with Ukraine should offer assistance to more inexperienced, such as traveling students. The notice did not tell Chinese citizens to evacuate the country. In contrast, other countries have been advising citizens to leave Ukraine, etc.
Can you read the last
So
paragraph?
if
There's
Where
something
does
really,
Ukrainian
India
I'm
stand
sorry.
on it? Where does
there's something
India
really
stand on
interesting in
it,
the last
Anita?
paragraph.
Okay.
Well, and Professor Asaf touched upon it. And I'm sorry, Tyler, I want to say one point. And I want to give you kudos because I haven't been in a while. This is why you have this room,
You're
and it's just
speaking, Alice.
no, I know, sure. I'm just saying this is beautiful because we can save lives instead of watch what's happening. What he's talking about is real time of what Putin and Xi agreed to, and why is it different than everything in the West that we're hearing?
Says,
And it also
If I
points
was
to
in
the
Ukraine, I'd be getting myself a Chinese flag. Right?
yeah.
and it
We
also
all
points
buy.
to the non-coincidental visit of Putin with Xi, and during the Olympics, and the initiation of these hostilities immediately after the Olympics. Not coincidental.
But
Vinny,
from
do you
has
know what's India's position? Because it was asked of President Biden, and he didn't elaborate on it. And I'm wondering if you have any idea because there are lots of Indians students in Ukraine, and so what's India's position on this?
Yeah, so there's 30,000 students in Ukraine. There's only one flight that got out they moved about 250 students. India is I tweeted an article as well to Tyler. India is playing the neutral ground because they have to keep Russia reasonably happy. Russia has been the biggest supporter of India for decades. And in the last 10, 15 years, has had an amazing relationship with Ukraine. So Ukraine's pissed at India right now, and so is Russia, because Ukraine's pissed because India didn't call it an invasion. They just said it's regrettable, blah blah blah. And Russia's pissed because India didn't back Russia up in the Security Council conversations. So they're trying to play a middle ground, and it's not working very well. But
Okay. Now,
they're trying very hard to evacuate. But Tyler, on that article, just go to the last paragraph. There's an interesting
I'm ready.
government. Yeah, just,
Yeah.
if you want to read that.
So the Chinese state-owned outlet called Horizon News appears to have accidentally published a memo instructing the other Chinese media not to publish anything which is not positive to Russia or positive to the West. Oh, so don't publish anything that is negative about Russia, and don't publish anything that is positive about Ukraine or Europe or the US.
Hey, Tyler, are you pitting this to the tour spaces as well?
No, it's on the top of the clubhouse room at the moment.
And Tyler,
Yeah.
but about 8 hours ago, our local news here says the China, the ambassador here, announced that to book for the flight back to China, and those with the Taiwanese passport, but actually it's not passport, it's the China format for Taiwanese citizens. That if you own that, you can book for the flight as well. So I'm not sure what happened there because that's how we are told here.
Okay, so the next, is there any more Ukraine Russian issues to?
Could I just add one thing to what LS has said about praying for all the people? We need to pray for the people in Ukraine, Russia, and China, because not all of them, in fact, many of them, do not support the actions taken by their leadership. So we need to distinguish leadership from the general population and not fall into another round of animosity that is so narrowly banded around the action of their leaders.
Okay,
I would
so
say a practical thing we can do is send the Ukrainian citizens a lot of Chinese flags to hang on their buildings.
Oh, Ben, yes, absolutely. Wait, I'm sorry, Tyler. Can we start a campaign and donate for that?
Can I chime in with my point, Tyler?
sure,
So
go
it
ahead.
has to do with nuclear. So my father, as some of you may know, he worked at the Nevada test site, which is where the free world during the Cold War tested the thermonuclear bombs that LS was speaking to. And there is a not even night and day, or I guess you could say day and night difference between the level of carnage a thermonuclear can do relative to what was dropped in Hiroshima, per LS's point. But I will tell you, those that know about that kind of strategic damage that you strap on a missile, that's not, I believe that's not ever going to happen. because that's the end. That's like a that's just that it literally is mad. However, the quote unquote the oxymoronic statement of tactical nuclear. So I asked that in a couple of these rooms this past day or two, and some experts were saying the following, which is, if you have a specific thing you need to accomplish, you have other options to accomplish it, and what you leave behind if you were to use a tactical nuke is very problematic. So it's very very problematic. As in, there's all kinds of letting that dog out of the dog pen is you can't put it back in. It changes the theater completely, even the tactical. So I think I think quite frankly, and I was also petrified when I heard Putin say it. But I think it is just a scare tactic to flaunt things like that. Because think about it, if he did anything like that, everything goes to a different level, and it really would incite not necessarily the any kind of a nuclear response. If he just did one kind of whatever, just as a demonstration, it would just change everything. And also very specifically, as you think about the different theaters, how they're going to possibly unfold, there's, we were talking about this in another room, that, Ukraine is a jewel to him. So there is not going to be any kind of demonstration of even a tactical anything anytime soon. I'm David. I'm done speaking. Those are some of the thoughts I've been noodling on the last few days.
Okay. So
there's an update. There's a quick update. So Russian Foreign Ministry just warned Sweden and Finland, if they join NATO, there would be reciprocal steps.
I'm sorry.
Correct.
I want to. Can you say that nice and slow again, please?
So Russian Foreign Ministry just warned Finland and Sweden.
Yes.
If they join NATO, there would be reciprocal steps.
Reciprocal steps.
What's your source?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What's your source?
No, excuse me. I can interject. This is LS. What he's referring to is the news that's come out lately that Finland and Sweden, and I'm late and I'm tired, so please forgive me. NATO has fast-tracked them. So they can fast-track to NATO. And Putin is basically saying to Russia, if you join them, there will be great consequences. So in the last 24 hours, because I haven't slept, my apologies, for my voice, I'm saying, they're saying we will fast-track you to NATO. And Putin is or Russia is saying, if you do that, there will be great consequences. And back to David's point, that's why I'm just going back to my core, pray, because this is just some scary shit, excuse my language, because I haven't seen this in my lifetime at all, where this could escalate. It's not about Europe. That's all I'm saying. I'm done.
Yeah,
All
that's what
I'm
I'm
asking
saying.
is,
Cuban
whoever
Missile
said that before
Crisis.
LS, what was the
No,
source?
no, just Google it. Just all you need to do is Finland. Just go, Robert, if it's you, Finland and the other
I'm
country.
asking you, LS. I'm asking the guy who quoted himself.
Oh no, I know, but I'm just telling. It's a general story. Oh,
Let it go.
Okay, so I've
think it's
Googled it,
Amish.
and here I have not found a source where the Russian minister is saying that. What I have found is a Finnish article from Finland that the Finnish foreign minister, the headline says, Finnish foreign minister, Finland taking part in NATO virtual summit. Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto said it is important that the opportunity to apply for NATO membership remains available. And this is from yesterday, this article. And I would love to see an article of what, no doubt Russia's going to respond to that. The question is how, and if they, and we've heard people are claiming to have sources. We would love to find a source.
I just saw one that says
I'm just
Sweden
retweeting it.
plan to stay out of NATO. I'm going to DM you now.
Well, hey, could I just give you a point of actual information that actually happened even before this Russian invasion into Ukraine? Finland was able to buy 64 F-35 stealth jets from the United States. Those are jets that usually the United States would only sell to a NATO ally. So even though they're not formally a member of NATO, we're treating them kind of pseudo because Finland's getting concerned. They can't that they're not going to be able to maintain neutrality. That they're scared of Russia, and so that's why they bought 64 F-35 stealth fighters from the United States. And again, that is a jet typically that is not sold by the U.S. outside of NATO or outside of its allies.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
can
also
I?
this is Robert. That's also why I say always track the weapons purchases. But the only thing that I'm saying is when someone is quoting that a particular government said something, I just ask, please provide the source. And thank you, Tyler, for what you provide.
Here's
But Rob,
hold on a second, please. I found an article that says Russia sends bone-chilling message to Sweden and Finland, threatens military implications if they go the Ukraine way. Amid the ongoing Russian military operations in Ukraine, the country's foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said on Friday that Moscow will have to respond if Sweden and Finland become NATO members. Quote, all OSCE member states in their national capacity, including Finland and Sweden, have reaffirmed the principle that the security of one country cannot be built at the expense and security of others. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu earlier stated that Ukraine may obtain. Oh, that's a separate point. So, but the source of this article is called EurasianTimes.com, which I've never heard of. So I'm not going to take fact until we see a more
but
reputable.
it's not. Yeah, no, but it's not that we
Exactly.
actually need something like that, though, Robert, because this new world order is had. Putin stated his plan very clearly Monday, and this if you play out the game theory, I will tell you, Putin he had to think through what's going to happen if I open up this can. What kind of response is going to be with regards to the increased NATO membership that I was, arguing about? Because that's been his point. Is he's anxious about increasing the footprint of NATO. But absolutely, a scenario that they thought through was that they would make a move on Ukraine, and the response would be exactly this. So this is not anything unplanned or anything. I mean, this is part of this new world. The last 70 years are over. NATO. This is going to accelerate NATO membership, or the NATO card carrying membership because of what Putin is doing. So he's saber rattling, making all these threats. But I will tell you, if you look at a phase one, phase two is that he would go after those countries anyways. So they're going to be smart about it, and they're going to accelerate their membership to NATO, and NATO's going to get empowered by this. That's kind of what door's been opened.
David, I'm not disagreeing. All I'm just saying is anytime somebody says a particular government specifically quoted something, and I read a lot of government transcripts, I get the game theory.
Sky
That's a
News.
given.
Sky News is the source.
So
I
that's
just
what I'm saying.
retweeted the Sky News clip as well.
Okay,
But
guys.
the guys, but guys,
If we
I'm
could,
sorry,
there's another
but let
breaking news.
but let's
There's
be
another.
clear. Let's please be clear. Like we're waiting for something to be reactive, and Tyler, I'm sorry, Tyler, you started this room to be proactive, not reactive. So we're tech, we're smart people. We don't need to wait for any entity or anyone to tell us something when we can figure it out ourselves and how we make the world better. That's why I'm here. Because in my mind, the most invaluable thing is time and knowledge. It's not health or wealth or for your family. It's time and knowledge. And do you help others or do you not? So we only have so much time on this earth. Everyone will die. That's inevitable.
Hey
So
guys,
how
I
do we
think
use?
Piotr just joined.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Open mic.
I wanted to
Tyler.
try and get back to some facts on this
Well,
instead. This is where our
excuse
thoughts
me,
are.
ma'am.
Can
Excuse
we?
me.
Piotr just joined, and his room was talking about the difference between Sweden and Finland and not
I'm
being able
sorry,
to send
ma'am.
missiles to Finland. So I would like to get a little bit more relevant info here. Thanks.
So,
Okay.
unless what you make your closing point here.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. I'm sorry because some people are weird. And I can find them. But I'm just saying you're right. The passions, and it's right, Tyler. You started this, and Cheryl and everyone. I'm talking about the core group. It was always to use tech for better, and you've done this all your life. if we can't help this world, the world we live in while we're existing, then all this is bullshit. Excuse my language, right? And Tyler, I know you know this. You believe it because we have a history, and you know the inner city. So how do we make the world better with what we have, and come together and collaborate?
Okay, so
That's
I'll
who
be,
you are. So my point being is that let's share the knowledge. I'll shut my ass up,
okay.
but let's learn from everyone else, and let's not try to get verified one way or the other. And Tyler, you know this because you know more billionaires than I do. I mean, damn, from tech. But how do you make it tech and technology and economics make the world better, not worse? And
I
that's
want
I'm landing my
Uh,
plane.
I want to.
Tyler,
So if I
Tyler, I just wanted to tell you that you might want to know, Young Labour or New Labour, I'm not sure, their account has been cancelled by Twitter. Apparently, I just was contacted by something to do with them making a criticism of the Labour leader, saying that for supporting NATO, and apparently his and it's a verifiable account. This is being reported by Daily Mail.
Okay,
I
can
just thought I'd let you
I
know.
I
hold on,
just joined late, but can I
hold
ask
on.
a question?
Well, before you do, give me 2 seconds here, because I think I know how to find a reputable source about this Sweden, Finland, NATO thing. Um, it says Eurasia Times is the only. Oh, here's another one. Wyon News or Vyon News out of India, which is actually very big in India. It says Russian warns NATO against inclusion of Finland and Sweden, and this is according to Maria Zakharova, as I said, the Russian ministry spokeswoman, not the actual minister, but the ministry spokesperson. Says, according to Wyon News, WION, which is quite well known in India, that Russia's foreign ministry warned against the inclusion of Finland and Sweden in NATO. According to the ministry spokesperson, the persistent attempts by NATO to draw those countries into the orbit of its interests and opportunistic policies haven't gone unnoticed by Russia. That's the quote from the foreign ministry spokesperson. So it's not saying they're going to, in the Wyon News version, it doesn't say anything of retaliation. The retaliation comments was from the EurasiaTimes.com. Again, I've never heard of that publication, so I'm going to wait for another publication to echo that quote. Although we could Google it. And anyway, so on the issue, and I'm going to hand it to Nicholas next. On the issue of Sweden and Finland and NATO, as a honorary Swede, as I've been told that I am by many Swedish politicians and even parliamentarians who are all dear friends, Sweden isn't part of NATO. That's true, and Sweden barely has an army, by the way, and Sweden knows this obviously. And Sweden has had Russian submarines all up and down its coasts for years now. And Sweden is correctly a little bit paranoid that it could be taken over in a day by Russia if they wanted to do that. And yet, the latest headlines that I'm seeing when I'm trying to search for this is I just found a headline from Sweden saying that Sweden's current position is that they're still not recognizing any official interest in joining NATO. However, Finland's ministers are saying that we are considering it and would do so if it was a matter of national security. Now, Finland and Sweden have a deal between them, a very long-standing, like probably going back to the goddamn Vikings, that if one of them is attacked, if either of them is attacked, the other will have their back in a brotherly kind of way. And I believe that to be true. However, again, if Finland's attacked, Finland has an army, and Finland is nothing to fuck with. And Russia knows that. And Sweden doesn't really have much of an army. So Sweden really benefits more than Finland does in that kind of handshake arrangement that they have. But I imagine it's true that if Finland gets nervous, they might likely join NATO. I'll defer to my Finnish friends who I could invite in to comment more on that. From the Swedish side, that's going to get internally debated endlessly, as all things like this would do in Sweden. And I think they would just have an endless meetings while Russia's attacking. They would still be having meetings to decide what they're going to do if Russia does attack, and they could be taken over. They'll still be having meetings, and they'll invite Putin to the meetings to ask him why does he feel it's necessary to attack Sweden, and let's have meetings about this for the next 20 years while we think about why you feel it necessary to attack us, while he's already attacked them and claimed control over it. So uh, it's kind of a
Hey,
joke, but
Yeah,
Tyler.
but
Tyler,
Tyler,
Fyodo's still
you bring up
here.
a really good point. Some of
Wait,
the
hey, David, can I get
geopoliticists.
so, a
Jorge,
Finnish woman was in
hang on.
Fyodor's room and spoke to this?
Yeah, Jorge, Jennifer, hold on, please. I want to hear what Nicholas's question is, and then we'll go to Jennifer and then Jorge. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Good morning. Thanks. Well, I just, I really find it difficult discussing the micro events and even the macro events. So I just wanted to make some observations and then ask some questions. And I've been listening to Peter yesterday, of course, and last night and when he's been running his rooms. And it's interesting to hear the minutiae, but I try to focus tech news on, in my view, is on the meta game, sort of like LS was saying. And saying what goes over the top of this. Of course, technology goes as the sort of background radiation. So my point is, if we look at the meta game and we understand that we're playing some form of multidimensional chess, and that we've seen strongman behave in this way before, and we've seen the appeasement of Neville Chamberlain, of Hitler, and the inevitable road it takes you down. So we've learned from history, while it may not be the same, it does rhyme. We know that the sanctions environment, we've taken step one. The step two is to remove Russia from the international system, but that, because of globalization, has a mutually assured destruction mode, just like the nuclear mode. So what the French and everyone else realized was that we can't really sanction these guys because we're completely reliant on them. And they've had a decade to create that, or longer, to create that necessity. So you can't sanction someone who's then going to starve you out or freeze you out. So he knows this. We know this. We don't need to play at the lower level. We can play at the upper level and understand mutually assured economic destruction is as dangerous, well, not to life, but it's as dangerous to the global order. So we do know that a new world order is being created. It is a tension between globalization and self-sufficiency. And the retaliation that we were hearing about, it was clear yesterday morning when we spoke about it, we said the retaliation that he's threatening is not nuclear, it's cyber, and that would be economic, pain, DDoS attacks, whatever, and attack on critical infrastructure, the 14 sites that Biden designated as sensitive that would be an act of war. So everyone set out the guidelines, and I wondered from Peter, Piotr, I don't know how to say your name exactly perfectly, whether he had any views at the meta level as to what options are available. So the same for Sweden and Finland. We have to decide, are we going to step up and meet this bully, or are we going to step back and allow him to do whatever he's doing for a long enough period of time that we can become self-sufficient again? And essentially, the next step would be then to deplatform Russia from SWIFT. And we also know, as we discussed yesterday, that they've already got alternative plans. And this is the route that takes you to a different economic world order if you have a separate settlement layer. And they are going to use crypto and their versions of crypto to do that. And as we know, they moved all their money away from exposure. And I believe they will stake the yuan as their backstop position under the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So I wanted less detail from Peter, and I wanted to know if we're looking at the meta and the macro, and we're realizing he will not stop, what are the meta and what's the timelines that he sees the geopolitics, the big geopolitics playing out? Because we know what's going to happen. We are not going to go to a hot war. This is going to go cyber. And then the question is, when will we cut them off from the financial system? That's really my questions.
Wait, I also want to
Shall
toss
I
to
answer,
Fyodor.
or do you want me to wait?
Wait,
Yeah,
no,
hold on.
Fyodor, I'm going to toss to you because you also the woman in your room that spoke on the reasons that Finland has the bigger army, etc., was good insight. So both those issues, if you wanted to address them.
Okay, and
Um,
before you do, Piotr, there was one last person to touch, which was Jorge or George.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I was going to comment briefly on the Swedes and the Finnish, but then Nicholas brought some things up which I'd like to comment after Peter, because I spent a lot of time in his room too, and there's some things that I think are important to note. These sanctions are going to have a ripple effect that is going to affect all of us in some way, and kind of we have a tendency to be on a freight train looking out at the horizon with a 3 foot PCV tube and thinking that what we see on the horizon is where we are today. We have that, that's the primary effects. You have to take down that PCV pipe and look ahead and see what's coming. Those are the secondary effects. And so I'd like to go into that. But as far as, after Peter, but as far as Sweden and Finland, it is true. The Finns have announced that they're going to spend $9 billion to acquire American F-135 fighter bombers. And the reason that's important is because the F-135 fighter bombers are the pinnacle of American aerospace. And they've only shared that with those countries that have been in the inner circle, like in NATO. And Finland is not part of NATO, as we know. So the fact that they're doing it just demonstrably shows that there's this inner cooperation. In Peter's room, there was a Swede who said, no, they're not going to go to NATO. And another Finnish woman came and spoke as well. And I respect their opinions, but I'm looking at the actual details of what's happening. So I'd like to go into those other consequences of the sanctions that relate to what Nicholas said after Peter spoke.
Okay, over to you, Peter.
And Tyler, I agree with everything they said. We were in the same room.
Alice.
LS, we have to keep order here. Piotr, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Piotr. If you don't know me, I'm running a 24-hour room on Ukraine at the moment and have been following this since December. And I work in geopolitics professionally. So just I'm trying to keep as stock of this situation as much as possible via Twitter and stuff. So let's just take stock of the situation at the moment. The Russians have control about 60-70% of Ukrainian land, territory, main military points, civilian areas. They have control over Chernobyl, and they were trying to undertake a multi-pronged attack onto the capital with the intent to control it and put it under siege-like conditions whilst they then go to Minsk, the capital of Belarus, to try and do some peace negotiations, but on their terms. Now, a couple of things to take note of here. The Russians have suffered upwards of 500 losses. The Ukrainians about 150, 200. Information is difficult to ascertain given the situation, and also what information is real and what is propaganda. But the crux of it is that the Russians have not made as much progress as they anticipated, and have lost more. But they've learned from history. Or they continue to operate like the Soviets always did, which was just fling as many people at the problem as possible and hope that it will, sheer numbers overwhelm, which in this case seems to have worked somewhat. But they're still behind what they wanted. The Ukrainians retook an airport, and there have been some important cuts in some of the fronts on the eastern flank in terms of a couple of the cities. So they failed to take the major northern city, so that route into Ukraine or Kiev is now affected. To Norway and Sweden and Finland, excuse me. The Finnish have a long-standing issue with the country given the Winter War of 1939 and 40, where the Soviets tried to overwhelm the Finnish quickly, like they're trying to do the Ukrainians. They just flung sheer forces, tanks, their full mobilization against the Finnish, and the Finnish just basically outplayed them through armed resistance, guerrilla-styled tactics. One particular sniper who killed over 500. He's amazing individual. But the Finnish have said, if Russia were to undertake some kind of campaign against them, 70% would be willing to take up arms. So the Finnish are ready to fight as much as the Ukrainians are ready to fight. So that would not be easy. The Swedes, as Tyler rightly points out, do not have nowhere near the same sort of size or significance of a military, which is why they've tried to remain neutral through so many other conflicts. The NATO the NATO are meeting with them, or have done meeting with them today. And the thing is, I think it's important to remember that whilst you can say, yes, we're going to join NATO, it's not like it happens overnight. This is a complicated process which has different phases of integration. Ukraine was, in one phase with a special partnership, as it's called. So what you could see is them be everything but NATO by name, if that makes sense. You could see them having the equipment, but they officially wouldn't necessarily be under NATO membership. So that being said, you could also see them in a looser partnership or some kind of arrangement. There are different levels of integration, as I say. So I think the countrymen, the leaders there, are definitely going to be entertaining this idea. And if that were to happen, then that would be a huge backfire for the Russians, because they want to see NATO decrease, not increase. So that's a mistake, a faux pas on Putin's part. That being said, I do not think that this is going to, one of the main questions is, when is he going to go into NATO and Poland and Baltics and so on? That's not going to happen, because there is a big difference between the step up of invading the republics or the breakaway provinces in the east to invading the whole of Ukraine, versus going from the whole of Ukraine to Eastern Europe. That's the entire eastern border. That's multiple countries on multiple fronts, each with their own well-trained forces, with the bolstered support of the British, the Germans, the French, and obviously the United States. And if the Russians were to undertake that, 200,000 forces is absolutely nowhere near enough. And even with the special forces that are positioned in Belarus, it wouldn't be enough to make any sizable ground that would make it worthwhile. They could undertake the operation, but it wouldn't be worth it, because they wouldn't get far enough into the countries to make it last. They would just be pushed back by NATO over time. And the other thing is, Russia would have to redeploy and reorientate so many of their forces, equipment around the world. They've got forces in the Caucasus, in Kazakhstan, in the north of Africa, in the Middle East. So if Russia is going to undertake some kind of super scale conventional ground force attack on Eastern Europe, it's going to be pretty obvious, and we'll respond accordingly. On the sanctions point, we have to remember that sanctions have a time lag effect. So whilst the sanctions have now been implemented, we're not going to feel the effects or observe the effects for a good week, maybe couple of weeks or so. So we need to take stock of the situation, and I think the Russians proposing a ceasefire or proposing the negotiations is. This was always the intention. They wanted to partially just show off the sheer might of the Russian military, but also, go to Kiev in a lightning speed attack to try and force a partial or either full-scale regime change. What I think is important here is how the West responds, in terms of it must retain unity, and it mustn't allow Russia to sort of get too much Russia's going to look for concessions and sort of say, well, we control most of Ukraine. This is the situation now, and we can dictate the terms of the negotiations. But that's because they want to try and get something before the sanctions and stuff begin to take effect, I think. But if the West can sort of continue to support Ukraine and allow the sanctions to begin to take effect, then you might see the Russians beginning to have to reevaluate and change their position. So it's a case, unfortunately, of waiting and Ukraine being in a very uncomfortable, occupied situation. The other alternative is what I'm calling the Cyprus Scenario, which is where we see Ukraine become a bit of a Cyprus, split between sort of west and east, with Kiev split along the middle like a sort of new Berlin or Nicosia, with a sort of UN buffer zone or something. That is an extreme potential, but it is a potential scenario. If the West and the Russians just cannot come to some kind of agreement, then the Russians just sort of go, well, we're going to sit here and just occupy it, and the West won't send in NATO. So it's going to be like, okay, you just sit there, you suffer at the hands of the sanctions, and we see this very dark period in international politics. On the counter contingency plans, and this is my last point. I think that I mentioned it before, which was, I think Putin's engagement in Kazakhstan was partially considering the fallout that would come from being isolated from the international financial system, which is Kazakhstan, as I said before, is the second largest crypto mining space. Russia's the third, and Ukraine has a decently sized one. So Putin, I think, has positioned himself in a way that he wants to try and control as much of that crypto mining and therefore currency space as possible to try and minimize or completely circumnavigate the impact of sanctions on fiat money. So, I think if he thinks he can control that, then he can try and sort of, get around it. China is, I think, blown over. China's not going to support Russia. They've already made it very clear, as the article above states, and through many of their statements at the UN and other times, that they are not on board with what Russia is doing. And they're having to tread this careful line because of their interests with continuing trade and stuff with the West versus wanting to keep Russia on side for their own purposes in the future. But China has more to lose from this than gain. So you can see this from how opaque their statements are. The same as India, the same as some of the other non-aligned countries. So I think China isn't going to come to sort of the rescue. And whilst we can talk about some alternative financial model, that again will not exactly be up and operational overnight. So, I think we need to focus on the here and now as much as the there and then, and just try and pray for Ukraine and support Ukraine as much as possible. But that's my initial assessment of the situation.
Yeah, Tyler, if I may, my view is a little different, a little more nuanced about China. They may not be actively, they may not be supporting them, but they're also not working against them. And that paves the way, really, for Putin to do many things. Whereas if China was aligned with the NATO nations, I don't think that China is going to be taking sanctions and so forth. And speaking of the sanctions, I think that, like, I went back and looked and saw, like, what does this mean for the world at large? And to tie it in with tech, I'll name the first two. So the Russians are either the single largest supplier, or second largest, or third largest supplier for platinum, cerium, and rhodium. And if you don't know, these are things that are used a lot in high-end electronics, like listening to me here speak on this iPhone. They're also used in catalytic converters. And I mentioned this yesterday. A friend of mine in Lebanon told me that a year ago, cars were being broken into and the thieves would steal the catalytic converters for platinum because there's a platinum shortage. And while there are other sources like South Africa, removing them from the market is going to be painful. The other thing is they're a significant supplier of copper. So if you use an electronic device, this is going to have some effect that we can't see clearly now. But again, you have to take that PCV pipe and look ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
George, sorry. So just to agree
Jorge
with
is fine too.
okay, sorry.
Can I just
Just
get
to
in
agree,
line?
just to agree with you, and I think that Piotr does a great job of highlighting all the micro events, and I think we're just looking at different scales, right? At the macro level, it is absolute. And this is the question I'm really asking the room, and maybe Tyler has thoughts on this, is that we are going to appease Putin. We are not going to face up to him. We are going to allow him to dictate terms because the mutually assured destruction that was nuclear missiles is now the supply chain. And that supply chain creates inflation in the rest of the world, and we are addicted to zero interest rate policy environment. So we have shown the weakness of our military willingness, or our willingness to sacrifice life, and he knows that. So I'm just saying, if we're looking at playing the game, then we are not going to deplatform him from Swift, it seems. I would be interested if anyone thinks that we're going to deplatform him from Swift.
Nicholas,
That's a certain question I'm interested in.
Yeah, let me
anyone's
just
answer.
respond to that really quick. I mean, China and Russia have been working to move away from SWIFT for the last, I don't know, 8-9 years.
Percent agreed. I'm asking the question: do you think we will deplatform them to precipitate that?
Yes,
You're
absolutely.
underestimating the West's ability, Nicholas. It's
Well, I'm sorry, if I can add in, this is LS. No, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'll just be quick. I'm sorry. Jorge, I'm tired. And
George or Jorge is fine.
George, you're right. And Pertola, I was in a room with you guys earlier, for the last 3 days, and I haven't slept, so I really need to sleep, but that's okay. But this is life. You guys are all correct, in my opinion. especially, Nicholas, I'll do, I know you're very intelligent and I respect you greatly because I followed you. For this game theory, and if we're playing, see, I always say everyone keeps thinking checkers or chess. I play the game of Go, more moves, right? So if you're thinking about this, and I really need to sleep, but I think what I'm sorry, what Patoli says better.
Just say George.
Oh,
Just George.
George, okay. But the two of you, what you guys said is correct. I think what he's going to do is this is game theory on the new economic order, not the old economic order. And I've been in the
We're
Bitcoin
in
community.
agreement, Ella.
No, I'm sorry. I just want to, please, so I can just finish so I can shut up. I'm sorry for my own self. I've been in the Bitcoin community for 2010, and I keep saying it. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? But if people follow it, it's like, what if, this is supposed theory, and I'll say this only in tech news to give Tyler credit because he's a friend. What if Putin or whatever said, oh, I'm just going to back a crypto off of a commodity, whatever that commodity was, gold, silver, platinum, titanium, then you start changing an economic order by
Right, he has a
default.
commodity currency. He
Yes, a
has
Well,
a
couple of
no,
things.
commodity
hold on,
currency.
please. I'm sorry, I'm almost going to land my plane.
I thought you done your
So,
point.
well, that's my point. Like, if he stood that, where does the world go, right? And then what if China
Let him
was
answer
in
that.
agreement with it and
No,
they would trade?
he,
So, my
it's, a,
point
it's a good
being is
question.
that, oh,
It's a good question. Let him answer it.
Yeah, so I
I
think you're
think
giving too
Alexandra wants
much.
to speak.
Oh,
Hold on.
okay,
Alexandra
sorry.
next.
When we get and when we
It's just
Can we just answer the first question first? Because I think
yeah.
there's the real question here that everyone's agreeing is yes, Russia has a commodity currency. Yes, they have a backdoor out to China. Well, yes, Piotr, then the Chinese are not playing ball in behind, in front of the camera, but behind the camera, they're saying fly the Chinese flag and you'll be fine. That's as good as a sign as you need, right? So, abstracting away from right this moment and into the future, do we think that the West will take the second step of deplatforming Russia from SWIFT and effectively cutting the West off from vital supply chain
That's an
materials?
act of war, Nicholas. That's an act of war if they did
I
that.
I
would
just want
also
to
like
hear
to
what
wait.
point
people
Can
out.
think.
I just before we continue speculation here, I just wanted to point out the incredibly conflicting news reports that are coming out. I'm literally looking at reports that are within an hour of each other. One saying that Zelensky says that they've repelled attacks on most
We
fronts,
want to
and
get
then
away from the
another one.
micro.
What? Wait, no, just 1 second. It's just that, and then on the other hand, we have one saying that now, like Putin is advancing on Kiev. We have a report
We
saying
know
that
there's a
China.
propaganda war, Alexandra. Let's get
Oh,
to the
for sure.
meta.
But I'm just saying. But we're basing a lot of our assumptions. I'm
No, we're
guessing for
not. I
most
think
of
we
us.
should abstract away from the detail of the micro because we know that all the information is suspect.
No,
So
you
let's get
can't do
away
that,
from
Nicholas.
that
You
Can
for
I?
the
you
Can
for
I
the
can't
just
can't
finish?
just
abstract
for
No.
away
the
from that.
purpose of the
Nicholas,
discussion. For the
Can
can
purpose
I
you
of the
please,
just finish
discussion.
Nicholas,
really quickly, please?
Nicholas, can you let
Please.
Alexander finish, please?
Thank you. Just very quickly, I understand that yes, there's a lot of propaganda. I realize that a lot of the reporters are getting reports from other reporters as opposed to getting from live on the scene. But we're basing a lot of our conclusions on these reports fundamentally. And one of the things is that I read a while ago Putin, who has been increasingly aggravated by the thought of NATO, right? That's why he put in, what is his name, Yukochenkov, or the guy that preceded Zelensky, who said Ukraine was not going to join
Yushchenko.
NATO. Yeah, thank you. And he was kicked out of the country. Now, Zelensky, for whatever reason, decided he did not want to advance on NATO. He didn't want to advance NATO, probably to keep the peace, and we see how well that worked. But then when something happened, Biden says, we are not helping Ukraine in its war. We are helping the NATO allies. So then we had reports that Zelensky said civilians, take arms because we're not getting any foreign aid. And immediately afterwards, there was a report from Putin saying, I'm ready to negotiate. So, and then from there, we now see that they're putting pressure on Kiev, along with a Chinese report saying that they're encouraging Russia to settle. Then there's another report that says that, well, if they may be pushing to settle, but it looks like they're trying to squeeze out diplomatic concessions as opposed to trying to actually settle this conflict. So what we know from all of this is just that we know very little. So
Great. So we
Alejandra,
it's
know
like
all
let me
of the.
just
So
say
that's what we just said. It's
that
all
is
micro.
why all those details are playing checkers. And Nicholas is right. Macro is playing the chess because you have to look several moves ahead. What they say
We're losing you, George.
today
Oh.
is just the
Well,
minutia. You have to look past that.
We can't hear you.
You're in the matrix, mate. I
I think
just want to
George
make one
is
point. I have to
just
go
to
back.
ask the question to you again, Piotr. This is directly to Piotr, just for this subject, not the underlying detail. We get there's lots of information. Do we think, as a room, do you have a view whether we will go to deplatform Russia from SWIFT? Because that's the next big chess move that the West has to decide on, in my opinion.
I think that the Biden administration made it quite clear yesterday that he prioritizes above all else Western unity and resolve in the face of Russian aggression. And the Germans and the Italians and the Spanish, to some degree, have made it very clear that they're not prepared
Understood.
to undergo the SWIFT option yet.
I think
But
it's
Okay,
only
so
going to
the question,
happen
but so I'm
if Russia
specifically asking
ends
can
this
up
I
question for a
finish?
saying
reason.
Can I
there's
finish?
Specifically
no
for a
I
reason.
reason.
haven't finished.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Can I?
This is a very over talky room today.
Sorry, I just want to finish my point. That's all. I need to go back anyway. So look, um, I don't think that the SWIFT option. All options are on the table, including the potential to sanction Putin. When asked directly by the reporters, is the option to sanction Putin on the table? Yes. How are you going to consider that? No answer. So they have the option to sanction Putin, but they are very, very opposed to do so. And it's the
Just a
same with the
question for
SWIFT.
you. Do you
So
think they will deplatform, the West will deplatform Russia from SWIFT? That's a simple yes or no answer. Do you think that will happen? Yes or no?
Nicholas, if you think you can apply black and white answers to international relations, then you're severely misguided. It's not that simple.
Do you think the West will deplatform Russia from SWIFT?
It depends
It's
what
we
Russia
know it's on the
does,
tip.
Nicholas.
We
Yeah,
understand that,
yeah,
but do
no,
you think it
Nicholas,
will happen?
Nicholas, I agree with Pator. It depends on what happens. But is it possible? Probability, 90%. If they keep being aggressive,
That's all I
yes.
want, is whether you think it
No,
will
but no,
happen.
I'm speaking for him, but not for him. And this is LS. I'm talking about AI and pure tech. If he keeps aggressing, absolutely. Because they've already threatened it. You can predict this. This is what I'm building. We can predict these analogies. And this is true AGI. That's what's scary. I'm scared of what happens next because AI says you can kill everyone on a tactical damn nuke and save the world. I mean, like, to me, that's everyone. Like, they'll kill half the population of the earth and say the rest will live better. That's what scares me personally. Okay, so personally, I get emotional about this
Yeah.
because I
And
know Putin
Ellis,
enough, so I'll shut up.
okay, Ellis, we gotta keep you on keep your mic off, and you need to get some sleep.
All right.
Get some
Can,
sleep.
can, can, can I make a quick comment? This is a very smart room with understanding and interest in international policies. I think we're looking at there is a big problem here, and sanctions, no matter how heavy, they might not be able to fix it. And the problem is that the West, and led by the United States, but let's call it the West, and Russia, led by Putin, are informed and guided by two very different narratives. And I think my concern is that these are separate narratives, they're parallel narratives that don't intersect, and we need to find a way for them somehow to converge. And this is where any type of dialogue or negotiation may be possible. Because narrative number one, the Western narrative, is that Russia is the aggressor and that the only way to contain Russia would be through the policy of deterrence, which includes expansion of NATO eastwards, as well as the escalation of sanctions. The other narrative that informs Putin, it seems, and this comes from his speeches, the two speeches that he delivered over the last couple of days, is that aggressor is the West, that in the wake of the Soviet Union that fell apart in the early 90s and 91, the West has been aggressing towards Russia by renegotiating, redressing the prior Soviet time world order, and Russia under Putin considers itself under existential threat. I mean, when you listen to what Putin said, and don't take my word for it, just find his last speech. It's about 25 minutes long. I'm sure it's available with English subtitles. But when you listen to that speech, you're talking to a person who is considering himself under existential threat from the West, who doesn't really have options, any other options in his mind, who says that we are likely to face financial, technological, and military sanctions and costs. But having thought through this, somebody mentioned the game of chess, having worked through what the sanctions might be several steps ahead, it still makes sense. The cost benefit analysis still makes sense to Putin to go and wreak havoc on Ukraine and destroy its military installations, to demilitarize, because, and again, I'm looking at the speech and I quote, kind of, sort of, so while even though you lock us away from any modern technologies, yes, it will be costly to us, Russia, but technologies change, centers of economic influence and power shift, and we can adjust to that. However, what is more existentially important to Russia is that if there is militarization of borderline territories of Russia, if Russia allows for that today, it will have a problem going forward decades and generations, and will continuously represent an ever increasing and absolutely unacceptable threat to Russia. So that is what informs Putin. So we have these two narratives, which are completely different, talking past each other. The West is trying to contain and deter Russia with sanctions. They're unlikely to work because they have been planned for. So the point is, I really think that until we get to a situation when we can acknowledge some of these existential concerns that Russia has and incorporate that into negotiations, we will not have a good result. And until then, Ukraine will burn. And that is a tragedy of the situation. Thank you very much.
Elena, you are a
Well,
true
if you remember
stateswoman.
his
True
speech, he
stateswoman.
clearly said that Ukraine was an invention of Lenin. See, the point is that Putin and these strong leaders, they do not think like that. They think in generation. It's not that he's under stress and then he's acting. Taking over Ukraine was always on the radar for last 20 years from the point when he came over. And he clearly mentioned, and this was always there, platform to platform, he has been saying that Ukraine was an invention of Lenin. He's basically accusing him. And the thing is that today or tomorrow, this is the perfect time. This is just about the timing. They knew that US cannot afford another war at this point of time. Europe, is slightly lazy, and we have reasonably diversified our exposure. So let's go in. And what Piotr said before, I agree with it. But yesterday itself, Piotr also mentioned that, okay, he did not think that Putin could go into Ukraine. He just thought that they're going to hang around at the border, but they did enter. So is there a possibility that we can be wrong about this thing now itself? Because why couldn't the analyst see Putin entering Ukraine when he was planning this for last, retrospectively, if you look at the financial books, he has been planning, shielding himself for last 2 years on all these sanctions. So that's a limited point I wanted to make, that Ukraine was always on plate, and this is what's going to happen. They, like China is also looking for a right timing to enter Taiwan. So it's all about the timing, and we should, as liberal and smart democracy, we should always be on alert that whenever we get these signals, we have to start putting out appropriate action, and that those signals were there for last 3 years for sure.
I just want to end on one final point before I depart, but we can talk about I think we need to not get too much ahead of ourselves. Yes, we want to think about the chess game, but at the end of the day, chess is still something that the micro does impact on the macro, no matter how much we don't want to discuss that. And we have a situation where, look, most of the information that is coming out of Western sources has been mostly on point. The predictions that the Russians would be going for Kiev, that's played out as expected. And so, we can say that the Russians are around Kiev. They have much control over the eastern part of Ukraine. They have utilized the Crimean Peninsula as a great source of supply and troops via the land bridge. And now we've got this situation where they are wanting to come to negotiate. And it's quite clear that they had this in mind, a lightning speed invasion with the intent of surrounding the capital, forcing either a regime change or some kind of at least pro-Russian government in sort of eastern Ukraine. And then I think, they're going to likely pull out because the Kremlin cannot sustain the size of the Russian forces in the country that they have. It's just not possible. And putting all your resources to the military at the cost of your people is not something that is going to enable Putin to last very easily. And I just want to point also to the domestic side of all of this. We've seen very quickly huge amounts of demonstrations and riots across parts of Russia, particularly in the cities, in defiance of this. So if anywhere that could potentially be one of the biggest downfalls of Putin is from within. Because at the end of the day, if as a strong man and a dictator or whatever, you don't have your people, then it's very unlikely you're going to be able to weather the storm. So just keep that in mind, and also just keep in mind that this is, hundreds of thousands of people are being displaced, thousands have fled into Poland, Moldova, and and also if you haven't watched it or heard of it, there were 13 soldiers on an island in the Black Sea who told the Russian naval ship that told them to put down their arms and surrender to, excuse me, but go fuck yourself. And they all lost their lives because of that. So
Peter,
just keep that in mind.
before you go, I have a question, and you can ask and maybe answer, and maybe the others. Is there's just a news report out on Vox that a refugee organization has just said that at least 100,000 Ukrainians have basically crossed the border, most of them to Poland and various other countries, and they predict up to 2 million Ukrainians will
Absolutely.
2 million Ukrainians will leave. Now, Poland has spent $400 million building a very secure border to stop these Syrians that were fleeing from war, to enter through Belarus and others. Will these sort of hardline Eastern European states now, I hope, will be more welcoming to Ukrainians and actually give them accommodation and facilitate their entry into these countries while they're sheltering from this war? What is your opinion on that? Will Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic change their views and allow these Ukrainian refugees to come into their country and settle?
Yeah, of course they will. I mean, the 100,000 is an estimate, but I'm not surprised by that. We have reliable reports that it's about several thousands already in Moldova, which is the tiny state, and Poland's the country that shares the biggest land
Absolutely.
border with the western side of Ukraine. I mean, Belarus is not exactly somewhere that people are going to go. So that it's either Poland or Moldova. And Poland is obviously, and given Poland's historical relationship with Russia, of course they are. Of course they're going to welcome the countries in, the Ukrainians in. The Ukrainians, there's about 400,000 people already in Poland who have migrated there and are expats. So there's a very large Ukrainian diaspora in Poland already. So the Polish will welcome them. Of course they will. It's different if you're talking about the Middle Eastern people. And this is unfortunately the harsh reality of geopolitics, that if you have a shared history, a shared identity, ethnicity or race or something like that, you're more likely to invite them or embrace them than you will sort of people from a different region. I know that sounds harsh, but that's just, it's pretty simple like that. You're more likely to welcome people who you sort of associate with more than people from a sort of far off region of the globe. So yes, definitely. I mean, 2 million, I don't know if that's we're going to reach those levels. Again, it depends how far this conflict continues, or if we see a ceasefire brokered, or if if the Russians just continue. But I do think they're going to seek a ceasefire at least. At the end of the day, as I say, there are human lives at the cost of this. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's all I've got to say.
And I'm sorry, I just want to add, Mike, I'm sorry, and thank you, Pretori. My chairman's from Poland, and some of my key people are in Poland now. And so when you say that, it's just you're right. I mean, I'm already knowing what's going on, and it hardens me because there's so much conflict on the ground. And I'll
Oleg,
shut
you
up, but
said 5 times.
Okay,
sure. But
we
this
got
is relevant. Sorry, we're just trying to
yep.
help people save lives versus lose lives. So
Thank you,
when
Ellen.
when he speaks, I'm sorry. Okay.
That's right. We got two other related articles that are coming out now with that Anonymous, which is the hacker group, which is appropriately named because they are anonymous. They've declared cyber war against Russia and have taken down Russian government websites. Amid the war with Ukraine, the hacker group Anonymous has declared a cyber war against Russia. The group has announced that it is supporting Ukraine as Putin ordered special military operations, and the social media accounts claiming to represent the group announced that they have taken down dozens of Russian websites in response to the country's military action in Ukraine.
Now
Okay.
that's a poker card. That is a big poker. That's an unintended or unexpected. Wow. I mean, sorry, I'll close the mic because I think everybody's jaw just kind of opened.
Okay.
No, actually, on the Russian side, Tyler, on the Russian side, the Conti ransomware gang said anybody goes for cyber attacks against Russia, they will be targeting them.
Right,
It's
but that is
not
that
going
is
to
a
be easy.
force to be reckoned with. Sorry.
The problem is anonymous is going to be difficult to retaliate against, which makes them a very interesting front for doing cyber attacks against Russia. So
They're like
the
special forces.
Th-
I mean, that's no way to.
This
They're
could be a
like cyber
really
special
interesting
forces.
weekend.
right this weekend could get very weird very quickly. So another interesting article just came out that departing from standard protocols, the Pope goes to the Russian embassy near the Vatican. Pope Francis went to the Russian embassy, ostensibly in Rome,
Is
to
this real?
yes, on Friday to relay his concern over Russia's invasion of Ukraine to Moscow's ambassador in an unprecedented departure of diplomatic protocol. Vatican spokesperson said that the Pope spent more than half an hour at the embassy. Quote, he went to express his concern over the war, declining to give details about the visit or the conversation. So there you go. The Pope doing his thing. And then on the Finland-Sweden retaliation issue, we have tracked down a video of Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman, saying on a recording of a live video that she had done with Sky News, where she does say the quote that we read earlier. That here it is, right here. Let me see if you can hear her saying it. Consequences and face some military and political consequences. And second question, they'd face military consequences. Essentially, is the quote. So, yeah.
Tyler, I tweeted the same video to you like
right.
30 minutes back. But anyway.
I know. We've had other conversations in the meantime. So that wraps up our conversations about Ukraine and Russia. But we have the regular tech news to blow through. Like the U.S. Department of Justice now says that BitMEX co-founders pled guilty to violating the U.S. Bank Secrecy Act, and each will agree to pay $10 million criminal fines. Coinbase had their quarterly earnings report, which was stronger than estimated, so good for them. The UK's online safety bill would mandate online platforms give users tools to verify their identities and block anonymous users. So that's super interesting. It would force the platforms to allow you to verify your identity and show that you have a verified identity. Essentially a path to what Twitter has, the blue check mark, which I happen to have in Twitter, where I'm a verified Twitter user. And ostensibly, that means they would have to make that available to you too, that you could verify who you are. That's very, very interesting. And the ability to ban people who aren't verified, also very interesting, because then that sets the pavement towards fully verified social media platforms. And then Block does their quarterly earnings report, which was very strong and is up now 15% as a result. And users spent about $18 billion globally in the top 100 non-game subscription apps in 2021, which is up 41%. So the app ecosystem is still very healthy. And those are your big, boring headlines for today. And we got to pause there. We're 6 minutes over, but we will meet again tomorrow. No, sorry, Monday, assuming the internet is still working on Monday.
Can we do a special Saturday room, please? Because just on, how heightened these conversations have
We
been.
very well might. So to participate in that, do follow the Tech News Club and the Tech News Around the World Twitter account, because there is a good chance we'll meet tomorrow, because we could all be in a cyber war for all we know by 24 hours from now.
Yeah, this is a special circumstance, it seems. So
yeah,
it might be for the best.
That's right. So we will see how that.
And Tyler, I apologize, my brother. I love you. You know me. Yeah. I'm emotional about this, but you started all this tech to save the world.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. I'm just committed to the passion, but
I hear you.
You know what I mean. I'll shut my ass and get some sleep.
Yeah, get some sleep.
Thank you, Elena. And forever who is interested in Ukraine's news, just follow Elena.
Alrighty. Thank you. See you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Talk to everybody tomorrow, hopefully.
Elena,
Thank you.
you nailed it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elena.